All righty. Well, thank you, especially for those of you who started with us at 9 a.m. Your endurance is admirable. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our last speaker, and we asked him to speak because we wanted to end this day on a positive and hopeful note. And for once, we have good news. Our final speaker, Sanford Lewis, is on the front lines of the debate of what is possible using existing corporate and securities laws to respond to the new Citizens United rights of corporations to spend in politics. After Citizens United, there was an open question. Well, there were many open questions, but there was one open question about the range of rights that shareholders could assert through shareholder proposals. One school of thought was that transparency was the only thing that shareholders could ask for, and that if they asked for more, the Securities and Exchange Commission would kill that proposal. Another school of thought said that shareholders could assert a far more robust set of rights. Mr. Lewis is clearly in this second camp. Sanford Lewis is an attorney who represents socially responsible investors. He is a principal at the Strategic Council on Corporate Accountability, and his investor clients include the New York State Common Retirement Fund, North Star Asset Management, and the Investor Environmental Health Network. He is an example of how progressive lawyers can use the securities laws creatively, for good, to request transparency and accountability from corporations. And it's precisely what he did at Home Depot this year. This is a true David and Goliath story. Home Depot was not a soft target. And due to his work, the SEC, for the first time, has issued a no-action letter supporting the ability of shareholders to ask for more accountability after Citizens United. So with enormous pleasure, to introduce to you Sanford Lewis.
Well, thank you. It's an immense honor to be here with you today, and I can't think of a time that I've been asked to give closing remarks anywhere, and the most important thing I can do is starting closing remarks is by congratulating the Brennan Center on a great day of speakers, and also your thought leadership on this issue of shareholders' role after Citizens United has been seminal in moving this issue along, and in fact, in inspiring my client to do what they did in the Home Depot instance. So again, if we could just have a round of applause for the Brennan Center. I have to start with the usual caveats, and probably even more. As others, I'm not an elections lawyer. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm actually mostly an environmental lawyer. So, I find myself in this funny position of talking about this issue. I come to shareholder activism from being an environmental lawyer and working on environmental issues, and it just happened that my client, North Star Asset Management, asked me in the course of various other shareholder resolutions that I work with them on, to work with them on this Home Depot issue that I'll talk about in a few minutes. But my words are my own. I'm going to try to, as a wrap-up speaker, one possible job could be to summarize what went on today. I won't be doing that. But if you want to play Where's Waldo, you can try to pull the threads, and I'll try to pull on some threads from the day in the course of my remarks, including things that I learned from other speakers. So I'm also, even though I'm talking about what more do we need beyond disclosure, I'm mostly known as somebody who works on disclosure. My blog is called Corporate Disclosure Alert, as is my Twitter feed. And And so I've built my career around disclosure issues, beginning with right to know, toxics kind of right to know issues, and I've always known, anytime I work on disclosure issues, that there comes a point in the process when you have to say, well, what happens after we win disclosure? What do we do then? And in the toxics arena, it was a discussion about, well, after the right to know, then there's the right to act, whatever that means. And here, as the Center for Political Accountability has done an incredible campaign and continues to do an incredible campaign and is building critical mass on these disclosure issues and a consensus, the inevitable thing happens that at some point you win that disclosure, and even when you get a critical mass of companies that start to do what you're asking for, eventually it moves into public policy and you have a uniform rule of disclosure. And so the question that raised here again is then what? And I learned today about one really excellent thing that the Center for Political Accountability has been doing on the then what, which is to get companies to agree to rule out specific types of political spending. A small group of companies that has now agreed to not do electioneering communications and to not do independent spending, and I think that certainly is one answer to the question of what else can you do, and the other question is, how do you continue to leverage that? In today's conversation, I heard a consensus about, I think there's a consensus about one thing, which is certainly we need more disclosure. And I absolutely agree. We need more disclosure. And there's a lot more that we can do. We're just midway through that fight. And I also agree with Professor Taub's presentation this morning that if you ask shareholders to vote on political, on whether a company should do political spending, instead of just more disclosure, that it's much harder to get a high vote on that issue because the consensus, the easy consensus around disclosure is quite different from the harder consensus about, a straight thumbs down on the political spending. But what I want to talk about is what the space of asking for a shareholder vote is as a result of this recent SEC decision. Okay, let's see. Whoops. There we go. So shareholder resolutions are done under this SEC Rule 14A8. The disclosure resolutions that are filed are done under that. There have also been recently some disclosure, another model that, again, the Center for Political Accountability has done with shareholders that was in particular at Target, which goes beyond just asking for disclosure, which asks about whether the spending that they're doing is misaligned with. You were just showing me about whether the disclosure is whether their spending is misaligned with their corporate values and whether it's posing a risk. And I think those are important things. There are beyond disclosure resolutions also. Last year, sort of with little notice at Archer Daniels Midland, there was a proposal that requested no corporate political spending at Archer Daniels Midland. And it's interesting, it verifies what we know about and what we think about in terms of voting. The provision, which was done by, I think, just a lone shareholder that was concerned about the issue, got about 5% of the shareholders' support, which is important because it's more than 3%, which is the amount you need to come back the following year. But in contrast, the Center for Political Accountability's proposal on the proxy got a 28% support. So quite a big difference that you can see there. And then there's the Home Depot example that will be voted on this year on June 2nd, and that asks for an annual advisory say on political spending. My client, North Star Asset Management, was looking at Home Depot and the way that they, in parallel to Target, had been supporting anti-gay candidates despite its despite its non-discrimination policy, which specifically said we won't discriminate based on sexual preference, gender, etc. And Home Depot already had in place some of the disclosure provisions that the Center for Political Accountability wanted, and yet they were still, and that had advocated at the company, and yet they were still doing this inconsistent policy. And so North Star said, what can we do? And we started brainstorming, and we looked at and drew from a bunch of existing models that are out there. So this was kind of the recipe that we used. We looked at the proposed Shareholder Protection Act. We looked at the existing say-on-pay resolutions. We looked at the target proposal. And we also thought about the fact that a hard-won change at the SEC recently was the right of shareholders to demand that or request that companies evaluate specific risks, which had been something that hadn't been allowed until shareholders really pressed the SEC on the issue. And we combined those in the proposal. And I'm not going to go into great detail on the proposal, but I'll mention a couple of things that are notable in the proposal. One is that it includes the total amount of it includes the company's policies on political. In the proxy, there would be a report, and the report would include a report on the company's policies and the company's past and proposed future spending on electioneering communications. And it would also, the proposal also requested an analysis of potential issues of congruency with the company's stated values or policy, the anti-gay candidates issue, as well as risks to the company's brand, reputation, or shareholder value, an issue that was flagged by the Target example. And it also includes, by the way, expenditures through a third party. So it would include, for instance, if electioneering communications were done through a trade association. In response to the company's challenge, the SEC issued a no-action letter saying that it refused the company's request to exclude the proposal. And what was most noticeable in this proposal was the language that I've underlined here, which it said, it does not seek to micromanage the company to such a degree that exclusion of the proposal would be appropriate. Now, what that means to me is that if you issued a proposal, filed a proposal that sought line-by-line approval of political spending, that could well be an example of micromanagement. And so there's as a strategic starting point, there's a question about how detailed you can get. And I would argue that there's a lot of room from this proposal to move forward. Let's see. Oh, okay. This is an advisory proposal. You could have a binding proposal instead, where you actually amend the corporate bylaws. You could separate out the issue of approving a policy from approving the spending. You could possibly even have categories of spending that you might ask for a specific vote on. For instance, electioneering communications as an issue that's pulled out, or donations to independent organizations, and ask for reports on those and ask for a yes or no vote on those particular things. We don't know how the SEC would rule on that, but there's reason to think that those would be some of the things that would be possible. You could also call for a supermajority approval of the political spending on the grounds that this is a compelled speech issue, and that would be appropriate. And there's an article that one of the panelists wrote with Lucian Bebchuk that sort of spelled out that argument. So to wrap up, there are a lot of different possible pathways forward from the Home Depot decision. One is more experience with the existing disclosure processes, as well as with this new model of an advisory say on electioneering kind of a proposal. You could also go You could also take on directly the idea of a binding bylaw amendment, which certainly we'd see a fight under Delaware law, which might either end up in the Delaware courts or fighting it out at the SEC staff. You could also look for SEC rulemaking or guidance. One possibility is that we know that the SEC is considering risk issues and their guidance related to how companies disclose risk. And so you could have some link between that and the shareholder approval kind of question. And of course, then there's federal legislation like the Shareholder Protection Act. So at the end of today, I think it's clear that there are a lot of diverse approaches that we can take to these issues and to shareholder empowerment, and that there's just tons of work to be done in these dangerous post-Citizens United times, and that we all need to continue the kinds of experimentation that my clients and the Center for Political Accountability and others are undertaking to find different ways of tackling this monstrous problem. So with that, thank you very much.
And now there will be some wine.